The 1921 had a way of swallowing sound. The woods were thick, old, and strangely still, as if every tree carried secrets it refused to drop. Back then, the mountains were quieter, the roads barely formed, and the people who lived around them kept to themselves. Life moved slowly, and most days looked the same. That sameness was what people trusted. It made them feel safe. It made them believe nothing terrible could happen out here. But safety in though was only a feeling, never a fact. The forest where the crime would later be discovered looked peaceful in the early morning light. Thin fog floated between the trees, slipping low across the cold ground. Birds were waking, calling from branches that creaked gently in the wind. It seemed like the kind of morning that promised nothing but calm. Yet something in the air felt slightly off, like the woods were holding their breath. People in the area had noticed that animals had been acting strangely for weeks. Deer moved in tight, nervous groups. Dogs barked at shadows. Even the hunters, who usually trusted their instincts more than anything else, sensed that the forest was carrying a hidden weight. The man who would find the creature, though he didn't know it yet, had been hunting these hills since he was a boy. He grew up here, learned to read the land by watching his father, and knew every path and ridge. People trusted him because he didn't talk much and never exaggerated. His life was simple and steady. He worked hard, kept to himself, and didn't ask for more than he needed. The forest was the one place he felt fully at ease. But in the weeks before the discovery, even he had started to notice that something in the woods felt wrong. Tracks that didn't match any animal he knew. A smell like old blood drifts through the trees without a clear source. And more unsettling than anything, a silence that fell too fast at dusk. There were other people whose lives were quietly tied to what was coming, though none of them knew it yet. A woman who lived alone at the edge of the valley, often seen watching the tree line with a troubled look. A young man who worked long hours at the mill and came home with bruises he tried hard to hide. A family with a locked room in their house that no one was allowed to enter. Each of them had their own stories, their own worries, their own secrets. Nothing about their lives looked connected. But the truth was already forming between them, like threads, tightening around a single point. Some of these people carried quiet anger. Others lived under someone else's control. A few were bound by fear, fear of the past, fear of losing what little they had, fear of someone who held more power than they ever would. Back then, power wasn't always about money. Sometimes it was about who people believed, who they feared, who they owed. And in small towns, debts didn't always involve money. They involved silence. In the months before the crime surfaced, small things had shifted in ways most people didn't notice. Conversations ended too quickly. Doors were locked earlier at night. A woman at the church had whispered that something evil had entered the woods, though she couldn't explain what she meant. A group of teenagers claimed they heard strange cries near the river at dawn, but no one believed them. The older folks said they had always made strange sounds, and it was just nature playing tricks again. But deep down, they felt the unease too. They just didn't know how to name it. Before everything broke open, all these people lived their lives the way they always had. They woke up before sunrise, worked long days, cooked meals, argued with loved ones, laughed when they could, and tried to forget the things that bothered them. On the surface, nothing about their lives seemed unusual. But beneath that calm layer, there were cracks made of old grudges, broken trust, hidden guilt, and quiet desperation. Some of them carried the burden of past mistakes. Others carried the weight of someone else's choices. A few carried secrets that, if revealed, would tear their lives apart. None of them knew that the woods had already buried the consequences of their actions. The land had taken something in, hidden it, and let it rot in silence. And when the time came, it would force someone to uncover what everyone else wanted to forget. In the days leading up to the discovery, the hunter couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in the woods. He kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see someone or something watching him. At night, he woke up for no reason, heart racing, as if something had passed by his window. He told himself it was just the cold or the long hours of work wearing on him, but the feeling didn't go away. The people tied to the secret felt the pressure too, though in different ways. One of them had been losing sleep for weeks, afraid the past would surface. Another felt a strange relief building, like they almost wanted the truth to finally come out. Someone else was getting careless, letting their temper slip, worried that control was slipping out of their hands. It was a quiet world on the edge of breaking, a place where everyone believed they understood their lives, yet no one saw how close they were to the truth. They had a way of shaping people, pressing their fears and desires into the land. And the land, unyielding, old, patient, had been holding tight to something that would soon force these people to face everything they tried to bury. When the hunter stepped into the woods that morning, he thought he was simply beginning another day. He didn't know that something was waiting for him, something that would pull every hidden thread into the open. The world around him still looked normal, but the normalcy was thin, fragile, ready to rip apart with a single discovery. And the moment he found that rotting creature, the quiet lives of everyone connected to it would start to fall apart, one truth at a time. The weeks before the discovery were full of small moments that didn't seem important at the time, yet each one added pressure to a situation already close to breaking. The people tied to the secret moved through their days with that same uneasy feeling the hunter had sensed in the woods. They tried to focus on work, family, and the usual routine, but something under the surface kept dragging their minds back to the same worries. No one talked about it openly, but everyone felt the tension rising, like the land itself was waiting for something to snap. The woman who lived near the valley was one of the first to feel the change. She spent long hours staring out her window, watching the trees as if she expected someone to walk out of them. She kept telling herself she was being silly, but the strange smell drifting from the woods lingered in her mind. It reminded her of something from years ago, something she had tried hard to forget. That past had never fully gone away, and now it was pushing back into her life in ways she couldn't control. She tried to focus on her chores, tried to read at night, tried to sleep without waking in fear, but none of it helped. The more she tried to pretend everything was normal, the more she felt the pressure building inside her. The young man from the mill felt a different kind of stress. He worked long hours because he had no choice, but lately the bruises on his arms and ribs were more than just the result of hard labor. Someone close to him had a heavy hand and a temper that flared without warning. The young man tried to stay quiet, tried not to provoke anything, but the anger at home only grew worse. The mill wasn't a safe place either. There were rumors about him, whispers that he was hiding something. When people looked at him, he could feel their judgment, their suspicion. It made him walk through life with his shoulders tight, waiting for the next blow, the next accusation, the next moment where his control slipped. Family with the locked room had their own problems building inside their home. The father insisted the room stay closed, and the mother never questioned him in front of others. But late at night, when the house was dark, their quiet arguments grew sharper. She wanted answers about what was inside that room. He refused to give any. Their children had noticed the tension, too. They tiptoed around the house, afraid of setting off another disagreement. The father, usually calm, had become harsher in his tone. Small things bothered him: spilled water, late meals, the wrong question asked at the wrong time. He felt control slipping away, and he tightened his grip in every place he still could. The hunter wasn't directly tied to any of these families, yet somehow he felt their troubles whenever he walked into town. People acted differently around him, as if they were hiding something but didn't want to show it. Conversations stopped when he passed by. People looked tired, worn down, unfocused. Something in their eyes made him uneasy. He felt like the forest wasn't the only place where something was wrong. He didn't know why he felt connected to whatever was happening, but the feeling grew stronger each day. One of the biggest shifts happened one night when the woman from the valley met the young man from the mill outside the general store. They rarely spoke to each other, but something about the look on his face that night made her stop. He seemed scared, angry, and exhausted all at once. She asked if he was all right, but he gave her a stiff smile and told her he was fine. She could see he was. There was a shadow in his eyes, something heavy he was carrying. When she pressed a little harder, he almost told her something. She could see it in the way he opened his mouth and then shut it again. But he stepped back and shook his head. He didn't trust anyone enough to share what was eating him alive. There were moments like that all over town, short conversations that almost turned into confessions, glances that held fear or warning, small slips that hinted at secrets. People were watching each other more closely, noticing things they had ignored before. Someone saw the father from the locked room house walking into the woods late at night. Another person heard the young man and his abuser shouting through the walls. A child claimed she saw the woman from the valley digging a hole behind her house. Maybe it wasn't true, maybe it was just rumors, but even rumors added to the tension. In a town this small, whispers moved like wildfire. Money played a role, too. The year had been hard on everyone. Crops failed in some areas and the mill cut back on pay. Some families had debts they couldn't hide anymore. People borrowed and owed and blamed each other for being desperate. Financial pressure pushed already strained relationships even closer to the edge. When people are scared about losing their homes or their pride, they make choices they never would under normal circumstances. The woman from the valley had a secret tied to money. Years earlier, she had lent someone she trusted a large sum. She never got it back. That person still lived nearby, pretending the debt didn't exist. Seeing him around town made her stomach twist with anger. Recently, she found out he had lied to her about why he needed the money in the first place. The betrayal reopened old wounds she had tried to cover for years. As her anger built, so did her fear, because she knew things about him he didn't want getting out. The young man had secrets he couldn't afford to let anyone know. Not only about the bruises, but about something he had been forced to do months earlier, something that filled him with guilt. Someone had pressured him into it, someone older and more respected in the community. He had kept quiet, afraid of what would happen if the truth came out. Every day, the guilt grew heavier. Every day, he felt less like himself. The father with the locked room had the darkest shadow of all. His past was full of things he hoped his family would never learn. That room wasn't just a room. It was a reminder of decisions he had made long before moving to the. He had built his life around control, making sure no one ever learned who he truly was. But someone had begun to suspect something. He could feel eyes on him. He feared exposure so much that he started losing sleep, listening to every creak in the house, every dog barking outside, every knock on the door. He hated how powerless he felt. Slowly, all these threads began to pull toward each other. One afternoon, the young man overheard the father arguing with someone behind the mill. He couldn't see who the father was speaking to, but he recognized the tone, the sharp, threatening edge he knew too well. The young man froze, listening. He heard something that made his stomach drop, something about keeping quiet and things going missing where they shouldn't. He didn't understand everything, but the meaning was clear enough. Someone else in town was hiding something dangerous. Later that same week, the woman from the valley caught sight of the hunter walking along the tree line. She waved him over, pretending she needed help with a fence post, but what she really wanted was to warn him in a way that didn't sound like she was losing her mind. She tried to tell him that something was wrong in the woods, that she heard cries at night. He looked at her carefully, studying her face. She looked worried, almost desperate. He wanted to take her seriously, but he didn't know what to make of her fear. Still, her words clung to him long after he left. The emotional pressure inside each character continued to build. The young man started having angry outbursts that he couldn't control. The woman became more paranoid, checking her doors twice before bed. The father began drinking more, something he had always sworn he wouldn't do. His wife noticed the change and started watching him with a mix of fear and suspicion. Their children whispered to each other about the strange smell coming from the locked room. And through all of this, the woods themselves seemed to react. The smell of rot grew stronger. Strange tracks appeared near the river. A local trapper found a dead fox with wounds that didn't match any predator he knew. People tried to explain it away, but their explanations sounded weak even to themselves. The final bursts of tension came in a series of moments that pushed everyone closer to the edge. One night, the young man finally stood up to the person hurting him. The fight turned physical, and for the first time, he fought back. He walked away shaking, terrified of what would come next. But something inside him had snapped. He wasn't willing to stay silent anymore. 2 days later, the woman from the valley received a letter slipped under her door with no name on it. Inside was a single line, "Do not talk about what you saw." Her hands shook as she read it. She hadn't told anyone what she saw or what she thought she saw. That only made it worse. Around the same time, the father noticed that the lock on his secret room had been tampered with. Someone had tried to break in. He didn't know who, but the fear of losing everything he had built wreaked havoc on him. His nerves frayed to the point where even a door closing too hard made him jump. All of them were carrying fear, guilt, anger, and secrets so heavy that something had to give. And the woods, silent and patient, held the evidence of it all, waiting for the moment when the truth would force its way into the open. The hunter had no idea that the next time he stepped into the forest, everything these people had tried to hide, every lie, every mistake, every moment of weakness, would be pushed into the light because of what he was about to find rotting beneath the trees. The night the crime happened was colder than anyone expected. A sharp wind pushed through the trees and scraped across the ground like something alive. The moon was low, half covered by clouds that looked heavy enough to crush the sky. The woods were darker than usual, the paths almost invisible. It was the kind of night when even the bravest hunters stayed near their fires. But 3 people stepped into those trees anyway, each one pulled there for different reasons, each carrying their own fear, anger, and secrets. The woman from the valley had been restless all day. Something inside her kept tightening like a knot she couldn't loosen. The letter she found under her door had shaken her to the core. She didn't understand how someone knew what she suspected, but she knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. When she saw a lantern flickering near the tree line that night, she grabbed her shawl and followed the light. She didn't think it through. She didn't plan anything. She just moved, driven by fear, by curiosity. by the quiet rage that had been building for years. The young man from the mill entered the woods from a different direction. His fight earlier that week had left him bruised and trembling, but he felt something close to freedom for the first time. He was tired of being scared, tired of staying silent. He had come to confront the person who had forced him into doing something terrible months ago. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted it to stop. He carried a lantern too, its shaky glow barely cutting through the dark. The father from the locked-room house was the last to enter the forest. He walked fast, almost frantic. He had discovered a second note earlier that evening. This one slipped beneath the door of the forbidden room. "You cannot hide it forever." The handwriting was the same as the one the woman had received. Panic clawed at his chest. Someone was watching him. Someone knew what he had kept locked away. He grabbed a lantern and rushed into the night, trying to find whoever had sent the messages before they exposed everything. His breath smoked in the cold air, his hands shaking even before the real fear began. The woods swallowed them one by one, their lantern lights scattered like dying stars. None of them knew they were walking toward the same place. None of them knew they weren't alone. The heart of the forest was a small clearing surrounded by twisted oak trees. Moss covered the rocks and the ground was soft and uneven. A faint smell of rot hung in the air, almost hidden by the cold wind. It was a place most people avoided without knowing why. The animals avoided it too. Tonight it waited like an open mouth. The woman reached the clearing first. She held her lantern high, her breath trembling. She thought she heard someone moving through the brush and spun toward the sound. A shadow stepped into the light and her body tensed. It was the father. He looked startled to see her there. His lantern flickered wildly, throwing sharp shapes across his face. His voice was rough when he asked why she was out here, but she saw the fear behind his tone. She didn't answer right away. She could feel something in the air between them, a heavy tension tied to years of secrets and the quiet suspicion she'd carried for so long. He tried to step closer, maybe to intimidate her, maybe out of desperation, but she stepped back. Before either of them could speak again, the young man entered the clearing. He stopped dead when he saw the other two, confusion washing over his face. His eyes flicked between them, realizing they weren't here by accident. A sick feeling rose in his chest. Something was wrong, more wrong than he had ever expected. The father panicked first. He barked at the young man, demanding to know why he was following him. His tone was harsh, full of fear disguised as anger. The woman tried to calm them, but her voice shook too much. The young man felt his anger rising fast. He had come here to confront one person, not to be pulled into something he didn't understand. Their voices grew louder. Accusations flew between them, hitting their deepest fears. The woman accused the father of threatening her. The father accused the young man of trying to ruin his life. The young man accused the father of forcing him into things he couldn't speak out loud. Every word cut deeper, pushing them closer to breaking. Lightning flashed in the distance, lighting the clearing for just a moment. In that brief second, they all saw the truth in each other's faces: fear, guilt, anger, desperation. No one was innocent here. No one was safe. When the father lunged forward, it didn't look planned. It looked instinctive, like an animal cornered and ready to strike. He grabbed the young man's arm so hard the lantern almost fell. The young man reacted fast, shoving him back with more force than he meant. The woman screamed for them to stop, but her voice was lost in the chaos. The father stumbled backward and hit a low branch, falling hard onto the ground. His lantern rolled, flames licking the dry leaves before flickering out. Darkness swallowed half the clearing. The young man stood frozen, breathing hard. He hadn't meant to push him like that. He stepped forward to help, his face pale with regret, but the father's fear twisted into rage. He grabbed something from the ground, a rock heavy and sharp. His hand shook as he lifted it. His eyes were wild. He shouted something about losing everything, about secrets coming out. The young man stepped back, terrified. The woman moved before she could think. She rushed between them, trying to stop the father from attacking. Her hands wrapped around his arm, trying to pull the rock away. He fought back, shouting at her too now, yelling about how she didn't understand what was at risk. The young man stepped forward to help her, reaching for the father's wrist. And in the struggle, messy, fast, chaotic, the father swung his arm too hard. The rock connected with the young man's head. The sound was sickening, a dull, heavy crack that froze the air. The young man dropped to his knees, his eyes wide with shock. Blood ran down his temple, dark in the faint lantern light. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His hand reached up as if trying to hold himself steady, but he toppled sideways, hitting the ground without catching himself. The father stared at what he had done, his breathing ragged. The rock fell from his hand. He stepped back, shaking his head like he could undo it. He whispered the young man's name, voice small, broken. The woman fell beside the young man, her hands trembling as she touched his shoulder. He wasn't moving. She felt for a pulse, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely feel anything. The truth hit her like a blow. He was dead. Silence crashed over the clearing, heavy and suffocating. Even the wind seemed to stop. The father backed away, stumbling over his own feet. He kept saying he didn't mean it, that it was an accident, that he was trying to defend himself. But the woman didn't look at him. She couldn't. She stared at the young man's body, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know him well, but she could see the life that had been stolen from him. His fear, his pain, his desperate need to break free from the person who hurt him. It all ended here in this cold, dark place. The father ran his hands through his hair, muttering to himself. His mind raced, bouncing between panic and denial. He said they couldn't tell anyone. He said no one would believe it was an accident. His voice cracked with terror. He wasn't thinking clearly anymore. He wasn't thinking at all. The woman finally looked at him, her eyes full of disbelief and disgust. She told him they had to go to the sheriff, that they couldn't hide this. But the father snapped, telling her she didn't understand what she was risking. If the truth came out, everything he had built, his home, his family, his reputation, would crumble. He begged her to help him, begged her not to ruin his life. She refused. And that refusal changed everything. The father's fear twisted into something darker. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight, desperate. He told her she had no choice. But the woman pulled away, her voice rising in panic. She threatened to run. She threatened to tell everyone what he had done. The father froze, breathing hard, eyes wide. He knew she meant it. He knew she could destroy him. He also knew that another secret couldn't leave the clearing. He looked at the rock, then at her, the N at the young man's body. His decision came faster than either of them expected. He grabbed the lantern, blew it out, and stepped into the shadows. The woman turned, trying to see where he had gone, but the darkness swallowed everything. Branches cracked behind her. She stumbled back, heart racing, fear clawing at her throat. She tried to run, but the ground was uneven. Her foot slipped. She fell hard. The father reached her before she could get up. She screamed, desperate, terrified. They struggled in the dark, the cold earth pressing into her back. He kept saying he didn't want to hurt her, but his hands were strong, shaking, trapped between fear and determination. She fought with everything she had, clawing at his arms, kicking, sobbing. For a moment, she thought she might break free. But the father was stronger, and the clearing stayed silent as a second life slipped away. When it was over, he stumbled back, horrified at what he'd done. He fell to his knees, shaking so violently he thought he might break apart. Two bodies lay on the ground now, cold and still. The moon slipped out from behind the clouds for a brief moment, lighting the scene with a cruel, pale glow. He cried then, loud, broken, choking on his own breath. He said their names. He begged for forgiveness from people who could no longer hear him. His mind worked in frantic circles, trying to find a way out, a way to undo what he had done. But there was no way back. After a long time, he forced himself to stand. His legs shook, barely holding his weight. He looked down at the bodies, tears still sliding down his face. He hated himself, but he was too deep in fear to stop. He whispered that he had no choice now, that no one could ever know. He told himself it was the only way to protect his family, the only way to keep his past buried. So he dragged the bodies deeper into the woods. He found a place where the ground was soft, where the air was thick with the smell of rot. He dug until his fingers bled, until his arms felt like they were on fire. He placed them in the shallow earth, covered them with dirt, rocks, and branches. His hands shook the whole time. When he finished, he stepped back, his lantern barely lighting the makeshift grave. He whispered one last promise, that no one would ever find them. But he didn't understand the land he lived on. He didn't understand that the never kept secrets forever. And the forest had already started to pull everything. He hid back toward the surface. The days after the crime felt strangely quiet, as if the entire valley was holding its breath. The father returned home before dawn, covered in dirt, sweat, and the kind of fear that clung to a person's skin. His wife noticed the moment he stepped through the door. She saw his muddy clothes, the way his hands shook, the wild look in his eyes. When she asked where he had been, he mumbled something about checking traps in the woods. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. Something told her he was close to breaking, and she was scared to find out why. He washed his clothes before anyone woke up, scrubbed until his knuckles were raw. He told himself that if he cleaned enough, if he erased every trace, he could forget what he had done. But the smell of the dirt wouldn't leave his nose, and his mind kept replaying the young man's final look, the woman's scream, the weight of their bodies as he dragged them across the ground. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the clearing again. He told himself it was an accident. He told himself he was pushed into it. But the truth sat heavy in his chest, refusing to move. His children sensed something was wrong. He had always been strict, but now he snapped over the smallest things. If a chair scraped too loudly, he flinched. If one of the kids asked where he had been, he lost his temper. They learned to stay quiet to avoid him, to tiptoe through the house. His wife tried to calm him, but he pushed her away, too. He couldn't let anyone close. If they looked too deeply, they might see the broken pieces inside him. Meanwhile, the disappearance of the woman and the young man shook the town faster than anyone expected. The woman's neighbor was the first to notice she hadn't opened her windows that morning, something she always did. She knocked on the door several times and got no answer. She told herself maybe the woman was visiting someone in town, but by evening the unease grew stronger. She reported it the next day. As for the young man, his absence was noticed within hours. He never missed work at the mill. When he didn't show up, people assumed he was sick. But when he didn't come the next day either, the whispers started. The foreman sent someone to check his home. The boy he lived with said he hadn't seen him since the night he stormed out after a fight. No one knew where he went. Some said he ran away. Others said he had gotten himself into trouble. The bruises that people had ignored for so long no longer looked like harmless accidents. By the second day, the sheriff had been alerted about both disappearances. In small towns, 2 people vanishing at the same time was enough to stir panic. The sheriff gathered a small search party, though most people insisted it was pointless. Forest accidents happened all the time. Maybe they got lost. Maybe they fell. Maybe they didn't want to be found. But the families of both missing people felt the weight of fear pressing down on them. The woman's sister walked from house to house, begging for help, her voice breaking more each time someone shrugged and said they didn't know anything. The young man's mother sat on her porch every night, staring down the road, hoping she would see him walking back. She prayed he would knock on the door, say he was sorry, say he was tired, say anything at all. The father tried to look concerned, along with everyone else. Whenever he heard someone mention the missing pair, his heart twisted. He had to force himself to look calm, to ask the same questions as everyone else, to pretend he was shocked. But the guilt inside him grew like a sickness. His wife noticed his shaking hands, the way he stared out the window at night, the way he jumped whenever someone mentioned searching the woods. The search party entered the forest twice. They walked along familiar trails, called out names, and checked near cliffs and streams. The father volunteered to join them the first time. He stayed at the edge of the group, far from the clearing, far from the place he had buried the bodies. Every snapped twig made his pulse race. When one of the men walked close to a patch of disturbed ground, not the right one, but close, he felt like he might pass out. He made some excuse and left early. People started talking. Some said the woman had been acting strange for weeks. Some said the young man was mixed up in something dangerous. People always look for someone to blame, and rumors spread easily in a town that lived on stories. Fingers pointed in every direction, except toward the person who deserved it most. The father had always been respected, a man of order and routine. He had built his reputation carefully. But now small cracks began to show. Someone mentioned they saw him walking into the woods late at night. Another person said he'd been drinking more than usual. His wife's quiet, sad eyes only fueled suspicion. People noticed her flinching when someone mentioned the missing pair. They noticed her avoiding her husband's gaze. Soon, they began whispering behind his back. At home, the husband and wife barely spoke. She asked him again where he had been that night. This time, he snapped at her, shouting that she needed to trust him. She stepped back, frightened. She had seen fear before, but never like this. She didn't know what he was hiding, but she knew it was something terrible. His guilt only grew heavier as the days turned into weeks. He hardly slept. He stopped eating meals with his family. Every time someone mentioned the search efforts or the growing worry in town, his stomach twisted. He imagined the sheriff knocking on his door. He imagined his children watching as he was taken away. The weight of those images crushed him, leaving him hollow. The community didn't know what to do with the fear spreading through it. Some people locked their doors earlier. Others avoided the woods entirely. A few looked at their own neighbors differently, wondering who among them might be capable of hurting someone. Trust, once strong in the valley, began to crumble. The woman's sister became a constant reminder of the loss. She refused to stop searching. She walked the woods alone, calling out even when her voice cracked. people her, but they didn't join her. Fear kept them home. Grief made her stubborn. Every time she came back to town empty-handed, the sheriff felt more pressure to find answers. The young man's mother grew quieter. She stopped speaking to the boy who lived with her son. She didn't scold him or blame him. She just looked at him with tired eyes, like she no longer had the strength to ask the questions that haunted her. She stopped cooking dinner. She stopped sleeping in her bed. She waited on the porch every night, even when the cold wind burned her cheeks. The father watched all of this from a distance. The guilt tore at him, but the fear of losing everything kept him silent. He told himself he had to protect his family. He told himself the 2 deaths were accidents, even though deep down he knew that wasn't the whole truth. He had crossed a line he could never return from, and the more he tried to justify himself, the more the truth ate away at him. Weeks later, when the first signs of animals digging near the buried spot appeared, he didn't know it yet. He didn't know the forest had already started exposing his secret. He kept living in the illusion that he had buried the evidence deep enough to last. But the land around has never been kind to lies. The town continued living in a state of quiet grief and suspicion, unaware that the truth was already pushing its way toward the surface, slowly, steadily, refusing to stay hidden. And the father, trapped in the aftermath of his own choices, felt the walls around him closing in day by day, breath by breath, as the consequences crept closer. The years that followed softened none of the sharp edges left behind by that winter in the. People expected time to mute the horror, to sift it down into something easier to carry, but some things refused to settle. Some things keep their shape. The case did not end with a single verdict or a moment of closure. Instead, it dragged on, pulling everyone involved into a slow, painful reckoning they could not escape. What had happened had changed them in ways that could not be undone. Even those who never saw the creature with their own eyes felt the weight of what it revealed, its decay, its secrets, and the truth it forced out of the living. The official records said the investigation was thorough, and maybe that was true. The sheriff tried to present himself as a man in control, someone who could guide the town through chaos, but anyone who looked closely could see how tired he grew, how much older he seemed by the end. He had spent months untangling a story he never wanted to hear, let alone repeat. He watched people break under questioning, watched lies fall apart, watched reputations crumble. He saw guilt seep through the cracks of even the proudest families, and he learned that some people are capable of far more than what they let the world see. When the final reports were written, he signed his name as if carving it into stone, but he knew the real truth was messier than any file could hold. There were arrests, of course. Some came quietly, others fought, insisting they were innocent or misunderstood. A few tried to blame the creature for everything, as if something dead and rotten could force a person to cross a line they already wanted to cross. The courts did what they could, but the law has limits. It can tell you who goes to prison. It cannot tell you who deserves forgiveness. It cannot fix the fear that settles into a community after learning that evil isn't always a stranger. It can be someone you shared a meal with, someone you trusted, someone who smiled like everyone else. For the families who lost someone, justice felt uneven. Some sentences felt too short, others too long. Some people walked away without punishment but carried guilt heavy enough to ruin their lives anyway. One mother said she felt like the world had split into 2 parts, the life she had before the truth came out and the life she was stuck in now. She kept her windows shut, even in summer. She didn't trust the quiet anymore. She didn't trust the people she used to greet at church. She said the worst part wasn't the crime itself. It was realizing how many signs she ignored, how many moments she brushed off because she didn't want to think badly of anyone. She said she would never make that mistake again. Others in town turned to anger. They hated how the case made the look to outsiders. Reporters, hungry for a story with a strange hook, made the town seem cursed, backward, full of secrets. And maybe it was, maybe every place is, but the people living there felt exposed, mocked, and misunderstood. They weren't proud of what happened, but they didn't like being defined by it either. Some avoided the subject entirely, telling newcomers that the stories were exaggerated or that nothing like that ever happened. But the older folks, the ones who were there in 1921, knew better. They knew that pretending something didn't happen only made the silence heavier. The hunter who found the creature tried to rebuild his life, but something in him stayed cracked. People said he flinched at small noises like someone startled from a dream. He couldn't shake the feeling of that day, the smell, the sight, the sense that he had stumbled into a truth he was never meant to uncover. He tried to return to normal routines, tried to keep to himself, but he no longer trusted the woods. Before the discovery, nature had always been his place of peace. Afterward, every shadow felt like it held something waiting to be revealed. He once told a friend that the creature didn't scare him nearly as much as what came after. "The dead didn't do the worst of it," he said. "The living did." What struck people hardest in the end was not the creature itself, but the way the investigation peeled back the thin layer of order people pretend protects their lives. The case revealed how money could buy silence, how influence could bend loyalties, how people could be pushed or tempted into choices they never thought they were capable of. It showed how fear could twist someone into doing something they could never explain. It showed how power, real or imagined, can pull people into darkness. The story became a quiet warning passed down in fragments. People didn't talk about it openly anymore, but it shaped the town in ways that lasted long after the news crews left. Some families moved away, wanting to escape the weight of their own names. Others stayed but carried the shame that clung to them for the rest of their lives. And the woods where the creature was found grew thicker, wilder. People still hunted there, but never alone. No one wanted to be the next person to find something they couldn't forget. Looking back, the case raised questions that never found clean answers. It forced people to think about how fast normal life can break apart, how easily truth can hide beneath everyday conversations, and how even the most ordinary person can hold something dark inside them. It pushed the town to face things most people would rather bury. The way jealousy grows quietly, the way secrets rot, the way fear turns into anger, and the way some people will choose their own survival over the life of another. In the end, justice came, but only in the legal sense. The deeper damage, the emotional wounds, the broken trust, those stayed. Lives were changed, families divided, and the town carried a scar that never fully healed. But maybe that is the closest thing to justice people can hope for in a world where right and wrong blur so easily. Maybe the point is not that everything was fixed, but that everything was seen clearly, even if only for a moment. The case from 1921 still stands as one of the darkest stories in history, not because of the creature rotting beneath the leaves, but because of what that creature forced into the light. It showed that human nature is more complicated than most people want to admit. It showed that power can twist love into something selfish, that fear can turn people cruel, and that guilt can haunt a person long after the truth comes out. And in the quiet, when the wind moves through the trees and the world feels still, some say you can feel the weight of that story lingering in the air. A reminder of how fragile trust is, how easily darkness grows, and how one discovery can change a town forever.